All right, good morning. Another question for Quora, a little bit late, but it came this morning, came about an hour and 15 minutes ago, exactly as what it looks like if you look at the timestamps everywhere. Can you answer this question? What are the guidelines for eating legumes on Pesach, Passover? Question mark, parentheses, quotation marks in the beginning, in the top. So, legumes, right? Not legumes. I don't know. Legumes. So, anywho, as we say in the business, this is one of the points of contention between Sephardic Jews and Ashkenazic Jews. Probably one of the distinguishing marks of the Ashkenazic Jews, who are the majority ethnically of Jewish populations, is that the Sephardic Jews follow basically the original, the original way, which is that there's no problem eating legumes on Passover. There is one opinion in the Talmud not to eat rice, but it's rejected. And that's if something is rejected, then it's not the law. So the law is, in Jewish law, that it's 100% permitted to eat legumes and other various things that we call legumes, which are not maybe scientifically legumes, but in Jewish tradition are called legumes or kitniyos, things that basically that they're the seeds are kind of what you eat, as opposed to the seeds, being inside, as would be something of a fruit. Meaning there's a fruit around the seed, or you just eat the whole seed type of question, and it grows from the ground and so forth. And there are many, many different opinions as to what qualifies under this category. But in any event, it's become a stringency in the Ashkenazic communities, and I personally follow them. This stringency, that is my custom or my practice. It's hard to even really call it technically a custom, because according to Maimonides, a custom is a universal custom, such as like Hoshana Rabbah. And it's certainly not a universal custom, it's a local custom. So I consider this to be more of a cultural expression, but many, if not most, both Sephardic and Ashkenazic decisors of Jewish law will say that in fact it is a legal question because it's so entrenched, and also because there's perhaps some legal reasons for it. But one of my teachers, who I'm not going to name, insists that there's no reason to do it, and actually that it's not proper to do. But all the rest of my teachers who are Ashkenazic, they do. This teacher of mine is of Ashkenazic ancestry, most likely, but it is follows Sephardic law, and also a particular interpretation of Sephardic law that he feels is a pure Sephardic law. So again, there's different approaches, but essentially, one thing that some people point out is that according to most Sephardic understandings, if there is a worry that something is mixed into some kitniyos, some legumes, is you have to search through it. So I've always heard that you have to search rice 3 times to make sure there's not a kernel of wheat within the rice. And that's really what it comes down to, is the worry that perhaps, basically on Passover, the law is that there are 5 grains that can become chametz, and those are the same 5 that can also be matzah. There's different opinions exactly how to identify some of these grains, but basically everyone agrees wheat is one of them, and then there's rye, barley, spelt. The controversial one is whether Shibboleth Shual is oats. And some say oats are not one of the 5 grains, and some say that oats are one of the 5 grains, and that instead Shibboleth Shual should be translated as a certain type of Middle Eastern wheat, a different species or subspecies of wheat. And so that's a big source of contention. And generally what's understood is that as far as chametz, that one should be careful. Certainly Ashkenazic Jews are careful not to eat chametz made of oats, although I know some Sephardic Jews who are lenient, and some who are strict as far as oats, chametz of oats, but then it works the other way too. Can you eat oat matzah or not? And that's another question. Particularly if someone has a gluten allergy or something, oats and spelt are perhaps better for them. And if there's a medical reason like that, celiac disease, something like that, so many people are much more lenient to allow the oats or spelt. Spelt for sure is fine, but oats is a question: can you use oats for matzah or not? And so generally, to fulfill the mitzvah of matzah, meaning everyone agrees you can eat matzah made out of oats, that's not a problem. The only question is, can you fulfill the mitzvah on the night of Passover, make a bracha? Some people might say you hear the bracha from someone else because of the question. But anyway, that's not the question here. So, in general, like we said, when it comes to rice, which is considered to be kitniyos, most Sephardic Jews say you should check the rice 3 times to make sure that there is no wheat or other grain within the rice. Although some people say nowadays that's not as much of a worry, because the rice that we eat today is not grown anywhere near wheat. But still, most people who do eat rice on Passover, either they buy pre-checked rice, which is maybe a little bit more expensive, or they check the rice themselves to make sure that there's no foreign objects in the rice. Other items that would be considered, certainly everyone agrees, beans or legumes. Again, doesn't really make sense why beans should be prohibited on Passover, but still nonetheless, in my house we don't eat rice, we don't eat beans, we don't eat any of these items. Not only that, but we don't eat other things that, we follow like the Hasidic tradition, but a Hungarian Hasidic tradition, which is more rationally based, and not as superstitious as some of the others, but still some superstition is there, especially with Passover. Passover is probably the one difference between the Hungarians and the Sephardim that's really marked very strongly. But in any event, the point that I'm bringing out here is that according to Ashkenazic poskim, things that are, first of all, the obvious question should be, according to the Chayei Adam, there should be no problem making something that is in the shape of matzah out of kitniyos. So meaning like a cracker made out of rice should not be any problem on Passover. And yet, we're ironically more strict, even though the Chai Adam says it's okay. For some reason, we're more strict. I don't know what the other poskim answer to the Chai Adam, but we're more strict in our practice with kitniyos than we are even with chametz and matzah. Doesn't really make sense. And I would say for sure, if you want to, you can rely on that Chai Adam. Again, I don't do it, but it's not out of any conviction that I'm not allowed to do it. It's just something I don't do. The other thing is derivatives of kitniyos as opposed to derivatives from chametz. Most Ashkenazic poskim say that you can have oils and sugars and things that are derived from kitniyos, so corn syrup, peanut oil, things like that. Poskim like Moshe Feinstein and Yitzchak Elchanan Spector and other major Gedolei Yisrael permitted these things on Pesach. And yet the general practice is you get the Coca-Cola with the yellow cap. That's regular sugar and not corn syrup like all year now. Coca-Cola with all year has corn syrup instead of cane sugar or whatever. And on Pesach you have, I guess we could call real sugar instead of the high fructose corn syrup. And again, is there any halachic reason for this? No, but it's so entrenched in our society that we do this. And when it comes to like the Hungarians, even though there's been much more leniency nowadays, but there was, a very strong practice, and not only Hungarians, Russian Hasidim, a lot of Hasidim would have a lot of stringencies for Pesach because in the old days you didn't have things that were certified kosher for Pesach. And so because of that, there were no oils used, only animal fats. Chicken fat from kosher chicken was the most common thing used, and and butter for dairy products, but no oils were used on Passover out of fear that it was a kitniyos-based oil or a chametz-based oil. They're not really the chametz-based oils, but there are corn oils and others, canola oils. Nowadays we have the cottonseed oil and some other oils for Passover. We do allow the same thing. People didn't eat fish, or they only ate fish that was raised in their house. Part of that was you didn't have freezers. So people would have a fish in their bathtub for Pesach. Some people still do that. Most people don't. So in our house, we'll buy a few loaves of gefilte fish or a few frozen fish, whatever, before Pesach, and it's not a problem. And certainly it's written on it, kosher Pesach. It's not a problem. That reminds me, I have a little bit of gefilte fish left in the fridge. I forgot to finish. The other, only a tiny bit of the jar gefilte fish, but I think we finished the other. So the other questions that we have here are and so therefore, like we said, there's really no issue with this in Jewish law, but we're strict more than necessary, just really out of family customs. The same thing, gebruks. And the thing is, in my family, we didn't have the customs of gebruks and only eating machine matzah, but I accepted this upon myself, and sometimes I think twice, but the way I look at it, I know some people disagree with me, is it's more of a cultural issue, more or less like dressing, wearing a shtreimel, wearing a bekesha, dressing in a certain way. these stringencies or these practices of the Passover are more cultural than religious in a certain sense, but there's certainly a religious aspect to the cultural practices. And that's really the way I look at it personally, not as a halachic issue, but rather, and not even what the Rambam would call minhag, but what is colloquially called minhag, custom, but I prefer to call it a hanhaga, a practice, which of course it comes from the same root etymologically as minhag, but I do think that there is a certain difference between a minhag and a hanhaga. Of course, again, I understand a lot of people disagree with me on this, and they say, chas v'sholom, you should be lenient, this and that. But I know, for example, there was someone who was a vegetarian, and they asked Rabbi Heinemann, and they had no Masorah of their ancestry. In the end, it turned out that this girl was actually a Gioris, she had to be Megayer. It was a whole thing because she thought she was adopted, and she thought she was adopted from a Jewish family, by a Jewish family. It turned out that it was a non-Jewish family, but she'd been frum for a while, but she didn't know what to do. What is she going to eat on Pesach? She's a vegetarian. And Rav Heinemann, Shlita, paskin for her that she could eat kitniyos but he didn't even know that there was a issue with her ancestry. And then it turned out that she made a gir l'chumra later, whatever. It's interesting. She had called me if I would do a quick geirus for her because she found out she wasn't Jewish, and I said, well, what shul do you daven in? She named a particular shul, a rav who passed away a few years ago, who was recognized and you know, in his geirus. And I said, just talk to him. She said, could you talk to him? I spoke to him. I told him she's frum. We know her for years. He did it 1, 2, 3. You know, because it was, you know, that's the way it's supposed to be. It's not supposed to take 2 years. You know, you have people. I don't understand even. People I know, they made the geirus that was halacha. So first they lived in one community, but it wasn't recognized by the Rabbanut and everything. But it was halacha. One community, they totally discounted them. So another community said, we'll accept you in our geirus. They moved to another community and said, we'll accept you in our geirus program. And but you have to learn for 2 years. But also, which was shocking to me, is that you cannot live like a Jew until you make the geirus. But it's a gir l'chumra. There already was a gir kahalacha. How I can understand that you're going to say, we're not going to count you for a minyan, you're not going to give you an aliyah. But to tell someone you should be mechal Shabbos, to tell someone you should not put tefillin, not wear tzitzis, that doesn't make sense to me. I don't know what basis you have, even if they made a conservative geirus. And there's a suffix, maybe it's kahalacha, but certainly they had an orthodox geirus. Just it wasn't, and it wasn't one that's recognized by the Rabbanut. I don't understand how this works. Again, I'm not the Rav of the shul there. I'm curious. What is the svara behind doing that? I don't understand. You know, I certainly respect the idea of saying, you know, we're not recognizing this geirus you had. So, and even to say, if that's the standard of the community, they have to do a 2-year program. All of that I understand, but I don't understand to say that you can't wear tefillin, since it's at least mitzina. I understand, you know, you're going to say, put it on privately. Don't wear your tzitzis out. That I can understand. Don't wear your tefillin at shul. Wear it at home before shul. That I understand. I don't understand to say you can't put on tefillin, you can't keep, and also this whole idea you can't keep Shabbos. Rav Peretz Steinberg, Zolga's on side, who I consider to be probably, you know, the 2 biggest Rabbanim I look up to in geirus would be Rav Peretz Steinberg and Rav Yisrael David Harfinis. And Rav Peretz, Zolga's on side, Shlita, he said it can follow sich on the hafla, some sofer, to say that when it says akum sheshovas, has nothing to do with Shabbos, has to do with the daytime, day to night, not night to day. And so, as long as you do Malacha Erev Shabbos and Motzei Shabbos, you're not over an akum sheshovas, So, whatever. That's not the question that we're dealing with here. I'm really getting off topic, but nonetheless, that's the story that we're dealing with. So, so what do you all say about this? I'm sure a lot of people are going to disagree with me. But again, say what are the guidelines? The basic guidelines are even though that you don't really have to follow. But if you come from an Orthodox background, traditional background, and you have certain traditions to be strict about certain things, it is ideal to follow your faith. Certainly not to make fights over this. That's the most important thing. Not to make machlokas, not to fight, not to get angry, not to get upset. That's the number one. That's all year round. It's not just for Pesach. But then beyond that, if you come from a certain background and it's a pious background, even they weren't the most pious people, but they kept certain stringencies, it's probably ideal to follow whatever your family does, unless you have a good reason not to. In which case, you go to a Rav, a Pesach, and you follow his pesach, like the story I told with the girl who was a vegetarian, and Rav Heinemann Shlita paskin that she could eat kitniyos, because really you don't need a Pesach to paskin you can eat kitniyos. Really, you can eat kitniyos, but it's a question of possibly Hatoras Nedarim and things like that, and so perhaps, and also a part of the Hatoras Nedarim issue is like this: if you erroneously believed that this was the halacha, you don't need a Hatoras Nedarim. But if you recognize that it's not the halacha and you accept it as a chumrah or as a hanhaga tova or something like that, then I would feel you do need a Hataras Nedarim. So, Mimanav Shach, since there's probably some kind of a suffix as far as that's concerned, and I'm sorry for using so many Jewish words, but we've already been here for over 20 minutes, and I have other things to do, then I would say that the best way to approach it is, if you have a real need, emotional need or whatever it is, that you can't handle not eating kitniyos, or your family only ate hand matzah, you want to eat machine matzah, or your family didn't eat gebroks, you want to eat gebroks, whatever it is. Both of these are turning. Maybe I'm not going to turn. Maybe I don't want to be stuck behind both of these guys. I don't know. But anyway, the point that I'm bringing out is, well, we got a traffic jam here. There's 3 cars on the road. 4 cars, actually, because there's one coming this way and one behind me. This is the country. Like my wife said, Idaho country is not New York or Pennsylvania country. My wife grew up in Idaho. I get distracted too easily. She said, when they went out to the country, there was no electricity. Here, there's the electric lines, Maybe now there's electricity in Idaho. I don't know. But there was no running water. There was, we went to the outhouse. So, anyway, that's basically my view on this. And again, I know a lot of people are going to disagree with me, but I certainly would say if you're a person who wears a shtreimel, then and you're not really Sephardi, then you probably shouldn't be eating kitniyos. You should. Certain things just don't go one with the other, and and you should eat gebrocks, and you should eat machine matzah. You should eat machine matzah, even though unless in Yerushalayim, if you're Yerushalmi, you eat machine matzah with the shtreimel. The Litvish Yerushalmi, they eat the machine matzah. Rabbi Yosef Chaim held the machine matzah is better, so you can't link the shtreimel to the machine matzah and the hand matzah. That I would say you wear a shtreimel, you daven to Sfard, right? But the truth of the matter is, it's not so. Reb Nachman Breslover said if someone didn't have in their family a tradition of not eating gebrocks, he could eat gebrocks. It'd be a Breslover chassid. But Reb Nachman also didn't say you have to wear a shtreimel. A lot of strong Breslover chassidim who don't wear a hat at all in their real, or they wear a fedora or whatever else, and they're real Breslover chassidim. So. If you're Sephardi, though, if you're of Sephardic or Mizrahi ancestry, do not accept upon yourself not to eat gebrocks, not to eat kitniyos. Follow your Masorah, because that's the real thing. The Sephardic way is the real way. And what else can we say about this? I think we've answered the question enough. That do whatever your community does. That's the other thing. Don't be parish metzibur. If you belong to a community, certain things you have to do what the community does. The same thing with a lot of other things in halacha. If you live in the middle of nowhere, do you have to wear a yarmulke all the time? Even does a married woman have to cover her hair, according to some poskim. But if you live in a community, if you live in Borough Park, and your married woman doesn't cover her hair, certainly in Williamsburg or Kiryas Yol or New Square, Monsey, wherever it is, unless you belong to, in Borough Park you could belong to a Reformed temple, or Monsey you could belong to Conservative temple. But so my understanding is the Reformed temple in Borough Park, all the people who daven there live in Brighton Beach. They don't actually live in Borough Park. They just drive in to go to the Reformed temple in Borough Park. But it's a little like storefront Reformed temple in Borough Park. But which is certainly a curiosity. So alright, so if you go to the Reformed temple, you're driving, don't expect you to cover your hair, So these are the stories. Appreciate everyone who's watching. If you made it this far, thank you. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe, comment. And I know some people are going to say I'm an apikoros for saying all this, but this is the actual halacha. The actual halacha is there's no particular halachic reason to avoid kitniyos, but if that is your practice, you should have a good reason not to follow. You shouldn't just do it like to make a political statement, unless you're doing everything Sephardi. If you're, what you can do, you can decide you're going to do everything Sephardi, but with the chumras and with the kulas, But that's like, before the bas kol of Hillel and Shammai, it's either you do Beis Hillel like the chumras and kulas, or Beis Shammai like the chumras and the kulas, but you don't do the chumras of both, you don't do the kulas of both. That's in Chazal already. And they said once it was a bas kol, we only follow Beis Hillel, right? But so the same thing. If you're going to follow Rav Yitzchak Abadi, so he has certain chumras and certain kulas you're going to do both. You can't just follow Yitzchak Abadi for the kulas and not for the chumras. However, it depends. And the same thing, if certain psakim are not of a cultural nature, but of a historical nature, or of an honesty nature, whatever it is, then you can rely on using Yitzchak Abadi, because Rabbi Yitzchak Abadi is going to say this is what is for Sfardim and for Ashkenazim, and this is what's for the whole Klal Yisrael. The same thing. I remember I brought up something Rav Avadi Yosef, a certain thing. It was more of a political, hashkafic type of a thing, but as also had something to do with the Hanhogas of a Bismedrish. And I mentioned Rav Avadi Yosef, particularly because he was the chief rabbi of Israel, right? And this was an issue that had to do with Israel and Zionism and things. And here was a rabbi who was clearly had some kind of a Zionist, even though he wouldn't call himself a Zionist, but had some kind of a Zionist connection. You couldn't call him an anti-Zionist, right? Or even a non-Zionist. He was more on the Zionist camp than not, and really the truth is the same thing was with Rav Eliashiv, Zechor Levrocha. And people don't know that, you couldn't call either of them anti-Zionists, and they're not really even as good as non-Zionists. They're really somewhere between a Aguda and Mizrahi. Frumkeit with a Aguda and Zionism a little bit with Mizrahi. And Chacham Avadia had a certain thing. He said you shouldn't have a flag in the shul. And I mentioned this to someone, and they said, "Well, we're not Sephardim." What does that have to do with being Sephardi? So it's the same thing. A lot of what Rav Avadia said wasn't a Sephardic halacha. Like, for example, Rav Avadia said you're allowed to brush your teeth on Shabbos, and a lot of other poskim say it could be an issur d'oraisa to brush your teeth on Shabbos. You don't have to be Sephardi to follow Rav Avadia. I remember there was a friend of that other girl, a Sephardic girl in the community, and she was like, "What about brushing your teeth on Shabbos?" And she said, "I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to brush to a frum girl, grew up in a frum home, but Sephardic, on the modern edge, Moroccan. So I'm going to brush my teeth either way. But I want to know." And I said, Rav Avadia said you're allowed to brush your teeth, so you don't need to worry. But the truth is, a psak like that, Rav Avadia didn't mean it just for Sephardim. Sephardim can brush your teeth and Ashkenazim can't brush your teeth. He meant that's the halacha, is that you're allowed to brush your teeth. All right, so you follow a different posek who says differently, so you follow your posek. But you can't say that that's a Sephardic psak because Rav Avadia said it. You know what I'm saying? That's his psak for the whole Klal Yisrael, is that you're allowed to brush your teeth on Shabbos. All right, so Rav Moshe says you can't, or the other poskim say you can't. But it's not an Ashkenazic Sephardic thing. Kitniyos is a Sephardic Ashkenazic thing, but even when it comes to that, the Ashkenazic poskim historically allowed derivatives of kitniyos, and they allowed things made from kitniyos ke'ein matzah. And yet we're knowing not to do like that. And so again, if that's the practice of your community, so that's the practice of your community. But halachically, for sure. Now some people say, "Oh, but there's other issues." There really isn't. Meaning, I remember in Virginia we had Rabbi Chait, who was a Rosh Yeshiva there, and he was a big rav, a big dayan in Monsey and other. Now he's in Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Chait, he would drink regular Coca-Cola without the yellow cap, with the red cap on Pesach, and all the other sodas, especially if you bought it before Pesach. And he did not, he didn't make it. And I said there's a geschmack with the yellow cap because it's real sugar. I know people who have an allergy to corn syrup, and they look forward to Pesach the whole year, so they can have their yellow caps, but it's not a halachic thing. It's more of, there are certain Coca-Cola connoisseurs who look forward to Pesach the whole year, so they can have the yellow caps, so they can so they can have one a little bit closer to it doesn't have the cocaine in it, but it has real sugar, So, but still, halachically speaking, you can have red cap. Certainly, if you bought it before Pesach, you can have regular soda Pesach with corn syrup, even your Ashkenazi. But if you're Hasidish, the truth is, even to buy the yellow cap, this past few years I've been lenient, and I've been drinking the yellow cap Coca-Cola, but that's been my new coolers, that I've started to. Same question about the soft matzah. Really, the soft matzah, anyone can eat soft matzah but to make it in your house, you have to know what you're doing. And so I would not recommend people to make soft matzah in their house unless they're real mumcha in how to make it. But and you should have the right type of flour and everything else. But if you want to buy from the soft matzah bakery in Brooklyn with a good hechsher on it, there's no reason an Ashkenazi Jew cannot eat that. There's no reason, because that's not when there's the machloikis of the Mechaber and the Ramah. The Mechaber said you could have ad tefach. This is not ad tefach. This is the same matzah that we eat. It's just not burnt. It's just as thin as our matzah. It's just they don't burn it. That's all. But it's totally baked. It's not chametz. It's matzah. I tried it once. I didn't like it, so I went back to the hard matzah, to the crackers. But the only reason historically that we have cracker matzah instead of soft matzah is that shelf stable. You can bake it a year in advance and it's still good. And ship it from Eretz Yisrael to America, or they used to ship from Ukraine. And it's so funny because when I was in Eretz Yisrael, the matzah was very expensive, and in America the cheapest matzahs, shmur matzahs, were the Israeli matzahs. I had with it, but that's hechsher. Handmade matzahs, $8 a pound, $9 a pound, something like that. I bought a bunch of those. I bought 6-7 pounds of that. Still have 3 pounds left, 3.5 pounds, whatever. But which I keep it through Sphera anyway. And I like to have matzah a whole year anyway. But I couldn't find the Sapper matzah this year. They only had whole wheat. I was gonna buy it, I didn't buy it. I had Borough Park matzah for the Storim, which I also like. I had the Manischewitz handmade matzah for the end, and I had all throughout Yantiv and Chol Hamoed this Badatz matzah. I had another Israeli matzah also, and I was worried maybe, I don't know, whatever it is. So, alright, we wasted enough time. Thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, subscribe, comment, and thank you so much for watching. We'll see you later. Alright, how do I turn this thing off? Alright, take care. Please subscribe, and please share with your friends.